Let's get a quick take on lawmakers approving a bill that would issue $250 million in bonds to go toward developing the National Western Stock Show complex. Patty Calhoun from Westward. Now, this is only part of what would be the needed funding for this major complex. I mean, it's almost $1 billion that would be needed that we know of so far. What did you make of this bond package being passed in the legislature?
Yeah, the budget is kind of beginning to look like the VA hospital. You know, it keeps growing. We keep hearing little bits and pieces. I have to say this move was probably a smart one by the legislature, assuming the rest of the plan goes through. It's the same tactic that was used at University of Colorado Health Sciences Center, and that actually is one of the projects that has worked, say, unlike the VA.
David Kopel of the Independence Institute and DU Law School, were you surprised by the move?
I'm surprised that the legislature was so supine to the National Western Stock Show breaking its own agreements it made the last time it got huge amounts of corporate welfare. In 1990, the voters in Denver passed a bond for upgrades at the National Western Complex, 1988, 90. And the National Western failed its obligations under those bonds to do its own maintenance and improvements. So now they're saying, oh, look, this place is a rundown mess. Well, that's kind of because you breached your prior agreement the last time you got corporate welfare. So I think it is foolish to invest more corporate welfare with these folks.
Eric Sonderman, political analyst, do you think this move from the legislature helps pave the way for the myriad other funding mechanisms that are going to be needed to pull this off?
Well, I don't know. I mean, $250 million is a lot of money, but it is chump change. It's petty cash compared to a much bigger bond issue the legislature's considering that we'll get to later in the show that might start with a $10 billion or some absurd number like that. It is not, as both David and Patty pointed out, this is not the entirety of the play. We're talking about a project of roughly $1 billion. Now, 250 gets you a quarter of the way there, but there is a major funding request coming at some point soon to Denver voters, to a lodger's tax, and even still, that doesn't get you all the way to $1 billion. They're going to have to, this is a layering approach of putting one layer of funding on top of another to see if they can put it together.
Susan Green, editor at ColoradoIndependent.com. Finish up for us.
Yeah, there's a lot of grumbling that this is a Denver-specific project and it was moved up to the top of the list and Denver gets preferential treatment, which I kind of understand. I understand those complaints, although I'm not hearing a ton of people, real people, not business people in Denver hankering for a bigger Western stock show complex, especially the people in Elyria, Swansea, and Globeville who are neighbors to it. I think the timing here is sort of interesting given the violence that's going on and the problems that are going on in Northeast Denver. I feel like it's a little tone deaf, frankly.
Gang-related violence erupted in Denver's Northeast neighborhood last week. Denver Safety Manager Stephanie O'Malley announced on Thursday that the city will invest $500,000 into community outreach, and Mayor Michael Hancock has ordered the police department to beef up patrols and install additional halo cameras in the affected area. Patty, hopefully this is something that can be quelled with these new policies, but I don't know if this is going to be enough. What do you think of the response to the situation so far?
Well, how about slow? I mean, there have been 17 murders in Denver since the first of the year, and most of them are gang murders. It is definitely a faster pace than we've had for many years. So why are we just now getting them to step up just because people are paying a little more attention, or they're more concentrated in the Whittier neighborhood? Or because, as Leon Kelly says, because now those areas are gentrifying, so white people are paying attention when the meetings used to just have blacks, then just have browns talking about gangs. It also feels almost like Leon Kelly is the city's entire gang fighting plan. He's been at it for 30 years. He is still the go-to guy. Maybe the city has been doing a lot more behind the scenes. We've heard about closed-door meetings between gang members and old gang alumni and city officials to see if they can quell things, but clearly it hasn't been too effective yet.
Dave, the issues are making a lot of headlines, but I feel that we're just a couple days away from what should be a major municipal election, and the two don't seem to be colliding as one issue, which I think maybe in a bigger city this would happen. What do you think about its timing and the moves that the city proposes?
Well, of course, Mayor Hancock doesn't have substantial opposition, and this shows that the practical way you can make things work in Denver is, first of all, whatever your party, stay on the good side of the Chamber of Commerce, be very pro-development, try to get them as much welfare as possible, so Denver can be a sanctuary city for welfare queens if they happen to be big business. Promote that, you'll get a lot of campaign contributions. That scares off everybody else. And so then whether you're doing a very good job running the police and promoting public safety, that's not such a big deal to your welfare-oriented campaign contributors, and you can cruise to re-election.
Eric, that was a different take when we looked at the whole gang violence issue, but we're talking about this, while it's officially May Day, this is happening in April. If we have a hot, contentious summer, and frankly, it looks like we may have that, this could get even worse for the city. Have they responded enough?
Well, first, I think I want to start by saying David missed the memo here that it's $5 into the pot for every time you use the word welfare today. So I think you're at 20 or 25 at this point in time. Of course, they haven't done enough, but you never know what enough is. And the whole gang problem has been somewhat intractable, certainly cyclical for years and decades in Denver. We all remember the summer of '93, which is now 22 years ago in the rearview mirror. There have been other problematic summers before. We're talking about the gang problem in Denver and the dozen murders sitting here on May 1st. And the temperature hadn't gotten warm, school hasn't let out, the summer hasn't yet started here. So it is worrisome, and it does portend a long, difficult summer. I think those of us in Denver, and obviously everyone across the country's had a case study this week in the problems of inner cities. And so I think this is much bigger than Denver. Thank God we haven't had the problems of Baltimore or hadn't had that particular horrific incident. But this country hadn't come up with a solution to inner city problems. There isn't an easy solution. It is not just about money. Maybe there are some answers that have a dollar sign attached to them, but if dollar signs did the trick, we would have started solving this problem back in the 1960s with the war on poverty and a whole lot of other things that have injected billions and now trillions of dollars into urban America. So these problems are much deeper than what you're just going to solve by throwing money at them.
Susan, what did you make of how the mayor and safety manager O'Malley handled it so far, and what else needs to be done?
Well, I had a bit of an issue with that crowd of people on the steps of City Hall talking about Northeast Denver, especially this week with what's been going on in Baltimore. I mean, Northeast Denver is our Baltimore, let's face it, and there are lots of people in that administration who are from Northeast Denver, so I kind of would have liked to have seen, not just symbolically, but really in a kind of act of solidarity for them to have held it in Northeast Denver. I agree with Eric that this isn't necessarily a solution, a problem that you can solve with money, but when you're talking $50,000 to handle a situation that has resulted in 5 to 7 shootings in the past week, and the week isn't even over yet, compared, let's go back to the last topic, $250 million for the stock show expansion down the street, something's out of whack.
Mm-hmm. The Aurora Theater trial began this week with harsh yet revealing testimony into the events leading up to the July 2012 incident. Arapahoe County DA George Brockler pointed to 2 separate psychiatric evaluations indicating the suspect was found to be sane at the time of the shootings. David, this was an intense week, and I think while the media in Denver is doing a responsible job at reporting and at least not making it a tabloid style, even just reporting it very actually of what's going on, the testimony it's heartbreaking. And we're just into the first week. What do you think of how it's gone so far and what we're liable to expect?
Well, it has been horrific, and as you say, we're just at the beginning of that process. But this was, of course, a mass crime that was intended to be horrific and to victimize as many people as possible. Indeed, as the district attorney pointed out in their opening statement, the number of people killed was actually far less than the plan for how many would be done. So, and as the opening statement also showed, and this was not a surprise, the prosecution's argument that the perpetrator was sane enough to be held criminally responsible partly depends on the long course of planning for this attack, and then even when you get past that, then the jury's decision about whether to impose a capital sentence depends in part on their finding of aggravating factors, of which we're going to have a long explanation. I think, as you say, this hasn't become one of these OJ disgusting type circuses. The media has done a good job, and for the people who tuned in on Monday to hear the opening statements of the defense and the prosecution, you saw on both sides very well prepared lawyers who did a good, serious job of outlining the beginnings of their case to the jury. And so I think they're treating the case, of course, with the great seriousness that it does deserve. And that aspect, at least, is so different from the mockery of justice that the OJ cable television special became.
Eric, beyond just, I think, the community reliving the whole incident over through the testimony and through what we're hearing, the different pieces of evidence, it also seems there's going to be some pretty significant issues coming out of this, whether it's capital punishment, the whole definition of insanity, how we're treating mental health in Colorado. Those seem to be able to have some legs and we're probably overdue for those kinds of conversations. Can those conversations come from this event, or is that asking too much?
No, I think they can. You'll need thoughtful people to promote those conversations, but your question is a very good question. Dominic, I've been critical around this table. I've been on record as being critical of District Attorney Brockler for taking this to trial, given the plea deal that was on the table, and I'm not sure what you're getting out of this by pursuing it to maybe have a death sentence that will be carried out 2 decades from now. That said, I have to give George Brockler credit for, I think, a very effective opening statement. I found myself strangely captivated. I was driving in the car somewhere Monday afternoon, had it on the radio, listened for a while, then got myself in front of a TV and tuned it in, at least in the background, for a couple hours. David is correct. The defense did also an articulate and very capable job. I think what makes, as I thought about it, what makes this case very interesting and somewhat unique is that you have a perpetrator who lived through it. Most perpetrators of these mass violence, horrific cases die in the process, either at their own hand or at law enforcement's hand. But here you have a live perpetrator. So you have a case study in terms of mental illness, and mental illness is different than insanity. And obviously that's part of what's being litigated here, is how different it is. But I'm fascinated, or at least interested, in the case study of James Holmes as somebody who went that far off the rails. And I think that's what we're going to see over the next couple of months, and maybe something will come out of it that prevents more James Holmeses in the future. That's really all you can hope at this point.
Susan, Denver has had to withstand more than its fair share of pretty major trials. This is no different. Actually, this is a lot different because this happened in our city right here. People have lived through it. How is this trial going to affect this community as we're moving forward?
I wish that it would open up a conversation about the death penalty, and I wish it would open up conversations about mental illness. But as both Eric and David said, it's so horrific that you're really just not seeing the abolitionists, the anti-death penalty people coming forward and using James Holmes as an example of someone whose life should really be saved, other than kind of theoretically. And in that theory, in the thinkiness behind this, I'm not sure that this will galvanize the community, but what this all hinges on is a debate about what's sane and what's not sane. And George Brockler's argument is that James Holmes, because he's intelligent, because he's high functioning, because he bought pork chops and cereal in the days leading up to the shooting, because he wrote about the weather pleasantly with his mother, because he took exams, because he texted friends, because he had this sort of banality and kind of normalcy to some of his actions. Because of those things, he's not insane. And there's another argument, which is because he seems to have understood what's right and wrong, or that this was wrong, because he was obviously trying to cover up, that he's not mentally ill. And I think it would be really healthy for not just our community, but our country, to discuss the possibility that you can one part of your mind or your brain can know that something's wrong, and another can be mentally ill and lead you to believe what he believed, which is his life would have more value if he took other human lives.
Patty, this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to this trial. What did you make of the first week?
Well, I think the first week was handled pretty well. As these are going to go, the lawyers did a good job on both sides. Certainly the courtroom setup, they did a very good job. The security was good. The reporters were, in general, pretty restrained. You know, I'm sure everyone, Susan must see it too. In crazy press releases you get, everyone who wants to bring out their experts or they have their related stories. Those you could live without. But it's the first week of what's at least going to be 4 months long. And it's unbelievable how horrific the testimony is. It's not going to get any prettier as it goes on, and you wonder how much people are just going to tune it out because they don't want to think about it anymore. They don't want to hear any more horrible details because they know just how horrible it was. I don't think we're going to get the big discussion of the death penalty, or certainly not for many, many more months. It'll come up in the case of the trial, but we're not going to have a more general community discussion, which I think we need. I think we need a general community discussion of mental health, but we're not going to get it because it's going to be a fight in the courtroom. So I just wish we had gotten the plea deal in the first place. James Holmes would be safely locked up for the rest of his life right now, and everyone could go on with trying to heal after this horrible crime.
House Bill 1388, a bill that would infuse the Public Employee Retirement Association, or PERA, with new funds from bonds, passed the State House Committee this week. The bill faces a tougher test in the State Senate, but has backing from Governor Hickenlooper and the Colorado Education Association. Eric, PERA as a whole concept, as an issue, has always been a big one, especially the last several years between the state treasurer, PERA itself. What do you think of this proposal?
Well, unlike most of the issues around this table where we opine and, we just opine, this one I'd like to think I actually know something about. My firm in years gone by worked with PERA for a number of years. These days I'm involved in something called the Colorado Pension Project, having had that PERA experience under my belt, which is trying to reform PERA structurally on many levels. I won't get into that. The project doesn't have a particular take on this bond proposal. I do have a take, and I find it very concerning on a number of levels. I think it has the potential to dominate this final 4 or 5 days of the legislative session. The sheer magnitude of what we're talking about. There isn't a price tag within the proposal. But people have been on record as saying plus or minus $10 billion. That's billion with a B. What that does to the state's indebtedness, what that does to the state's risk exposure is huge. They have jerry-rigged this proposal together. First of all, just the lateness of it. Something of this consequence you don't drop at the 11th hour or the 11th hour and 59th minute. As the Denver Post editorial articulately said, you give this something like this some time to gestate, you give it time for public discussion, but they sprung this very, very late in the game. There's a lot of political firepower behind it, from the governor to some tacit support from the state treasurer, although he is feeling a lot of heat at this point from his Republican allies, to Lord knows the Colorado Education Association and other public employee union groups who have an obvious interest in this. Maybe David can use his welfare word again here, because it does a smack of that. This thing is jerry-rigged. They're issuing the bonds through the Colorado Housing Finance Authority. What this has to do with housing, anyone can tell me, but they're using that as a dodge around Tabor. The covenants in it that elevate the supremacy of PERA in the event of any economic hardship in this state, to where those debts go ahead of all other state services, is worrisome and troublesome. And the opposition to this is not only emerging on the right from the usual Republicans, but the Colorado Fiscal Policy Institute, which is a very left-leaning kind of organization, has also come out against it for exactly that reason. What this could do to other state services if and when the economy goes bad, as it does cyclically.
Susan, this is a very important issue. We have to tackle it to be sure that Colorado employees are taken care of, but is this the right way to do it? What do you think?
I agree with Eric. I mean, this is an enormously complicated issue. There's a study due out soon that I think would inform the issue a lot. And, to the criticisms that this is coming too late, the lawmakers and the people, including Hickenlooper, who are advocating for it, point to the fact that it took this long for PERA's board to vote on it. But we have how many days left in the session? A couple days left
Handful.
in the session. This is one of this, because it involves Tabor and because pensions are just complicated, and this housing authority bonding is complicated. So because it's all so complicated, I don't see why they shouldn't kick it down. I mean, I'm not a huge advocate of kicking things until the next session, but when I was making calls about this, nobody really seemed to know what to think about it, other than the fact that it's bipartisan. Certain people, they like it, but as Eric pointed out, there's a lot that stinks about it, especially the timing.
Patty, does this have a chance to get out of the 11th hour, seeing that there's A, some uproar about it, and B, a split legislature?
It has a chance if they all drink a lot at Cinco de Mayo across the street this weekend. We only have 3 more days in this legislative session, unless it goes into some kind of Tabor trouncing special session. This is not the only controversial financial bill. We still have the hospital funding program, and it is complicated. You wonder why the board couldn't have looked at a calendar and thought, maybe we need to come up with this a little sooner, instead of letting the legislators talk so long about drones and yoga instructors. I just think when it's this complicated, legislators will decide they will kick the can down the road, because it's too much to decide on right now.
David, do you buy the argument that the calendar placement's strictly because the Para board voted late?
Sometimes, as I think Eric said on a previous show, it's sometimes easier to get things through late when everybody's in a hurry to wrap things up. While we're all trashing it, I should say that Penfield Tate is one of the major players in this, and if he were here, I'm sure he would be able to give a very cogent and strong advocacy for this. Not being a finance expert, what it looks like to me is we have pension benefits that have been promised to public school teachers, police officers, firefighters, all kinds of government employees who have worked for 20 or 30 years on the basis of the promises that they were made. The state government has drastically underfunded the contributions it should be making to have the money to pay those promises it made. And yes, one of the reasons they're underfunding it is because they spend so much money on welfare for people who haven't earned it, instead of saving the money for people who have earned it in government service. And then when you say, well, we're going to do this very complicated borrowing scheme that'll somehow get us out of the fact that we're not putting in and haven't been putting in the money we should, it seems simpler. Why don't you just cut the welfare spending and put the money in to the pension plans for the real employees? And even if you don't want to do it, it should go to the voters, and it should be discussed in much more detail and with time and transparency than we can have in a rush at the end.
For the record, that's $10 more for the welfare fund there. Just want to be sure that's keeping track.
That pays for all the beer after the show, as you well know.
It's time for a favorite part of the show, Disgrace of the Week. Patty, as always, start us off.
I'm going to return us to Aurora and to the Children's Academy, where a 4-year-old girl was sent home with the Oreo cookies she'd brought for lunch, and she was not allowed to eat them because they were not healthy enough. Why Aurora Public Schools think they need to police what a 4-year-old has brought for lunch when she also had a sandwich and string cheese. And she's not allowed to eat Oreos unless for some reason she had an allergy to Oreos that her parents had forgotten when they'd packed the lunch. That is not the school's business.
Absolutely outrageous. David.
The Republic of the Marshall Islands, formerly a United States Trust territory, now an independent country, with a compact of free association between the United States and the Marshalls as of 1986. The United States took on the obligation to defend the Marshall Islands the same as it does the United States, and yet after the Iranian government seized a Marshall Islands flagged ship in the Strait of Hormuz, the response of the Obama administration has been close to nothing. What a great signal they are sending to Iran and everybody else that the United States is a paper tiger and all of its defense promises mean nothing to this president.
Eric.
A young man around Denver who's become sort of a habitual fraud expert at a very young age. Patty and Westward have done a good job reporting on him. His name is Adam Shryock, I believe, if I have his pronunciation correctly. He has now been ripping off multiple charities or multiple causes in the name of doing good deeds for charities when all they're doing is lining his pocket, starting with breast cancer, now with something of selling $1 million of mattresses that people thought were going for a good cause when all it was lining his pocket. This person has already done some time behind bars. He needs a lot more time behind bars. Clearly, he's a habitual case of charitable fraud.
Susan.
It pains me to have to say this in the 21st century, but people who use the term illegitimate children, especially in trying to explain why riots are going on in Baltimore, and what's more, people who use the term illegitimate children in one breath and then talk about the legitimacy of the unborn in another.
Say something nice about somebody rather quickly. Patty.
Speaking of the unborn and a last-second bill, that we once again have yet another thinly disguised abortion bill coming up in the legislature. Good for Senator Beth Martinez-Jimenez, who jumped parties from the Republican side to help vote it down.
David.
Many people are instead of celebrating May 1st as Totalitarianism Day, are celebrating it as Victims of Communism Day. And the victims are not only the hundreds of millions killed in the 20th century, the victims are those right now in Venezuela.
A friend of mine, Ben Valor Kaplan, one of the smarter finance people and investment people around Denver, he had been up until a couple days ago the vice chair of the PARA, Public Employees Retirement Board. He resigned from that board in protest, as a minority vote on that board, in protest against this ill-considered $10 billion or who knows how many billion-dollar bond proposal.
Susan.
George Brockler, the DA in the 18th, who I, like Eric, have spent plenty of time criticizing, I think did an excellent job in the opening this week, as did the defense. But that man can talk. He has a silver tongue. And as people start considering which Republican is going to run for Senate, I kind of wonder if people are going to be looking at him.
That's all the time we have tonight. Thanks for tuning in. Remember that if you missed any part of the show or want to catch our web-exclusive segment, CIO Postgame, check out CPT12.org or YouTube. Also, be sure to check out the CIO podcast on iTunes. For everyone here at Channel 12, I'm Dominic Dezzutti. Thanks very much for watching. Good night.